Imagine dating without pressure of needing to make a good impression. Dating is killing people out there. It's so fake and exhausting.
Ever feel like dating after 40 is just an exhausting performance?
In this episode, relationship coach of 20 years Shana James reveals the simple 2-minute shift that eliminates dating pressure and instantly creates real, enjoyable connections. Stick around. This changes everything.
The thing that opens you up for a deeper connection is not an affirmation, not more therapy or another workshop. It's actually something you can do in the first 2 minutes of your next date. Welcome to this episode of Practicing Love. I'm your host, Shana James, and I'm back with another solo episode. So last time I told you that the real reason love feels harder to find after 40 is not your age or your circumstances or that the good ones are taken. It's that your protection is working too well. And I left you with a promise. I told you that the first real opening move, the thing that actually begins to shift that protection, was smaller and more honest than most people assume it is. So today I want to make good on that promise because I think once you hear what it actually is, something's going to click. Not because it's complicated, but because it's actually really simple and really specific. And specific is what changes things. I also want to tell you upfront that when you hear this, your first reaction might be, that's it. It feels too small or too simple. You may feel like it feels too weird or there's got to be something more to it. I've heard that reaction from clients. And I want to tell you something about that reaction because the people who skipped this step, and I've never heard anyone talk about this before, to be honest, the people who skipped this step because it felt too small stayed more stuck and stayed in that kind of disappointment and disillusionment with dating. But the people who tried it came back and said, some of them, that it was the first time in years that a date felt good. One of them even said it was the first time she actually enjoyed a date in a really long time and not just tolerated, right, but enjoyed it. So what is this first move that changes everything, has the possibility to change everything? Most people think the first move is you decide you're ready. So you update your photos, you download some apps, you find some singles events, or you reach out to friends, you start saying yes to more social things, put yourself out there, right? None of this is wrong. These are all moves that matter, but we could look at them like they're moves 5 or 6 or 7, not the one that matters in the moment. And when you make moves 5, 6, 7 without this one that I'm talking about, something predictable happens. People tell me this all the time. The apps feel like a chore. Dates feel like auditions. People you meet, you never quite get to know who they are, and thus they can never clear the bar. I really want you to have high standards. I'm not talking about lowering your standards. But oftentimes people don't clear that bar, not because they're not good people, but because you don't actually get to know them. You're going through the motions without actually having opened up to each other, without having really learned about someone else. The thing that actually opens you up for a deeper and more real connection is not an affirmation, not more therapy or another workshop. It's actually something you can do in the first 2 minutes of your next date. And it's even something you can do on an app, in a text. And what I've found is it changes everything that follows. And I started doing this because I was an exhausted mother of a young child. And when I was dating after divorce, I was committed to not having any drama. I didn't want to waste my time. I didn't have time to waste. And I didn't want to go on dates that weren't going to feel good. I wanted the dating process to actually be enjoyable. And it was for me. And I think this is a huge part of why. So here's what that first move is. Again, you can do this at the start of a date. You can also even pre-frame the date on a text or on an app. But that before the small talk takes over, you name the context, or you could call it the intention of the date. And here's what I mean by that. Most dates operate on a set of unspoken assumptions. Two people show up with silent agendas, both quietly assessing whether the other is good enough, both managing how they come across. And nobody's saying any of this out loud, right? I mean, we all know it's happening in a way, but no one's saying it out loud. So you end up sitting across from each other in a kind of performance or trying to prove that you're good enough, hoping you're doing it right, and then scanning for signals from the other person while the actual connection stays out of reach. I've dated now, I realize, I don't know if I'm proud of this, but I will say it. I've dated in every decade of my life so far because I was divorced in my 30s. So I dated in my 20s. I dated in my 30s after divorce. I've dated in my 40s. I've dated a lot. And every date for me was not just a date to find love, to find lovers, to find partnership. It was also an experiment because I've been a coach for over 20 years. And so I wanted to check out what works and how to feel more connected, more relaxed, less stressed. I wanted to use my own life as an experiment. What causes ghosting and what has dates actually move from a first date to a second date. All of these things in the background, I was exploring when I was dating. And like I said, my dates have overwhelmingly been enjoyable. So back to the context or the intention of the date and bringing this at the beginning, what you can do instead of going into small talk is simply name what you'd both rather be doing, which is learning about each other and enjoying yourselves instead of needing to get something right or make a good impression. Imagine dating without the pressure of needing to make a good impression. Imagine that whole thing disappearing. So it's quite simple. Again, like I said, you may think, okay, that's too simple, or you may think this is a little weird, but I'll tell you more. So stick with me. You could say something like, I'm experimenting with a different way of dating, one where neither one of us has to prove or impress each other. I'd really rather just be honest, take the pressure off, and see what's real between us. Would you be open to that? Right? That's a powerful question and a powerful statement. And then you get to see how a person responds. Or a simpler version, I'm more interested in being real here than trying to impress each other. Can we keep this date honest and relaxed? It's really that simple. That's the move. A few sentences at the beginning of a date that really shift the entire context from a silent auction to a shared exploration, or from two people performing at each other to two people actually discovering each other. Now, again, I know because I've shared this with many of my clients who have then gone out and practiced and had amazing success, but their first reactions were things like, ooh, that sounds like a lot. Won't that be weird to someone? Isn't that going to feel too heavy or too serious? Is that going to signal that I'm the kind of person who makes everything into a big deal? The interesting thing about that reaction, like I said, that almost every client I've worked with has said something similar. And they were absolutely sure it would come across as too much, too intense, too awkward. But when they tried it, what happened was honestly the opposite of what they expected. So my clients have told me that they felt more relaxed and that dates actually felt lighter, not heavier. Conversations went somewhere real instead of circling the usual surface topics that drive so many people crazy. One client told me it was the first time she had genuinely enjoyed a date in years. And she really wasn't enduring it. She was enjoying it. Another said he didn't go on the emotional roller coaster he usually goes on during the date, right? Where you start fantasizing about a future before the appetizers come and then crash when they don't text back. That roller coaster didn't happen because the date was grounded in reality from the start. Another client told me that his relationship started the night of that date when his date was so relieved that he brought her this new way of talking to each other, this new way of engaging that is such a relief to so many people. Dating is killing people out there. It's feeling so fake and exhausting. And most of the exhaustion and disappointment of dating comes from that unspoken context that both people bring separately to the experience. Like I said, the private agendas and the private conversations we have in our own head that none of us want to admit. Am I good enough? Will they like me? Where's this going? And it's not that we have to share our innermost monologues and the places that we get stuck in our inner critic. But when nobody names any of that, both people tend to spend the date managing impressions instead of really being present. So again, it's not like you have to say, this is what my inner critic is saying about me. But when you say, hey, let's just be real with each other here, instead of trying to impress, the connection that forms is going to be much more real. It's no longer a connection between two performances or two people trying to please or make someone happy. Nobody wants this. Nobody enjoys this. It's lonely. It's frustrating. It's shallow when we do that. So we've got to find another way. And I think I've found it. Because when you name this context, when you create a shared context instead of private individual context, when you say, hey, let's be honest with each other instead of impressive, a few things happen at once. First, your nervous system gets a message that it doesn't have to be on guard. It's like giving yourself and the other person permission to just get more real. The other person feels the relief as much as you do. And both of you then, instead of scanning for signs of approval, can actually start paying attention to what kind of connection or interest is there, whether there's something real. And I talk about in my Honest Dating Manual that there are so many different kinds of connection that are possible, especially for people who are dating later in life and you're not here to immediately or maybe ever have a family. You know, it's different, right? There's so much more freedom. You can have lovers if you want to have lovers as an adult. If you are honest and two people are consenting, you know, you get to choose. You don't necessarily have to live with someone, move in with someone, have a lifelong partnership. There are so many ways that you can choose to be in relationship when you get outside of the box or the way that is prescribed for us. So you can shift the conversation that you're having, the date that you're having, from that really painful question of, does this person want me, to asking, what is possible between us? Who could we be to each other? And we will only know that if we're really getting to know each other for real. And so that shift, as small as it seems, changes the whole experience. If you haven't yet taken the quiz to see what keeps you from having the best love and sex of your life, go to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz. You'll get a personalized report of your strengths and challenges in the 5 crucial areas that lead to your most fulfilling and exciting love and sex life. Go to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz to find out. Before I share a story that makes this concrete, I want to say that most people who have done any personal growth work have heard the word vulnerability enough times that they feel like they know what it means. It's, you know, maybe even makes them want to roll their eyes, because having done the therapy and reading the books, right, you understand the concept. But as I mentioned in my last solo episode, there is a difference between understanding vulnerability and the idea of actually practicing it with a real person sitting across from you. In a situation where you want something, where it could go wrong, where your nervous system is activated, I've talked about this and worked with clients who are therapists and coaches and involved in personal growth work for decades. It's very common. So saying this at the start of a date is really not difficult in theory, but in practice, there's a part of you that will probably want to take it back before the words are fully out of your mouth, or that will get sweaty palms or butterflies in your stomach before you say this, because it requires you to show your hand a little bit, right? And to say that you care about the quality of this interaction more than you care about seeming effortless or seeming cool. And that can have you feel exposed. But it's also exactly why it works, because exposure, when it's honest and intentional, is the beginning of real connection. And it's the foundation of what creates intimacy. And every client I've ever worked with has felt pressure on dates. So the person sitting across from you is undoubtedly feeling, if not the same, a similar pressure to what you're feeling. And most people feel relieved when someone else is brave enough to relieve that pressure. I had a client I worked with who'd been divorced for a few years and had 2 kids, a career she was proud of, and a dating history that had left her convinced there was something wrong with her. She wasn't despairing, but there was a low grade resignation underneath everything. And she kept going on these dates that technically went fine, but she came home feeling disappointed and vaguely invisible. And when I described this practice to her, naming the context, taking the pressure off, asking to be honest rather than playing games. When I described this practice to her, naming the context, taking the pressure off, asking to be honest with someone rather than play games, she looked at me like I'd suggested she show up in pajamas and said, "Nobody does that." And I said, "I know, it's kind of the point, right? But are you willing to try it?" So she tried it on her next date and she came back to our session and said something I hadn't heard from her before, that the date was actually fun, that she laughed, she felt like herself, and that the guy she went out with was visibly relaxed when she said it, almost like he'd been waiting for someone to say that for years. These two did not end up in a relationship. But what she said after the date was she didn't spiral. She didn't do the usual thing of replaying the whole date, trying to figure out what she did wrong or what she could have done differently to make him want her, because the date was real. And real things end so much more cleanly and with your dignity intact. It's the ones that are performed that leave you disoriented, doubting yourself, wondering what you could have done, wondering why you haven't heard back. When you show up for real with another person, there's so much more respect, so much more connection, and so much less drama and pain. She said something to me too that I hope gives you more hope, because she said, "I forgot what it felt like to actually enjoy a date. I got used to not enjoying them and thought this was just how it was going to be." And maybe that's the most important part for where you are right now, because I don't want you to get used to not enjoying dates. That is not the cost of dating after 40. That is the cost of the wrong approach. Okay, so what does dating in this way actually require of you in practice? Let's be clear that it does not require you to be fearless. It does not require you to have everything figured out. It honestly doesn't even require you to believe it will work. What it requires is a willingness to value connection more than performance, and to say that once out loud at the beginning of a date in your own words. And your own words matter. And I can give you a script. I actually have one if you want it. But what actually inspires another person isn't perfect phrasing. It's your honest intention behind imperfect words. You might stumble a little. You might feel awkward saying it. That's okay. The awkwardness is not a problem. It's actually more evidence that you're being real more than being polished. And aren't you exhausted of being polished at this point? If someone responds to this idea with confusion or discomfort or dismissal, it tells you something important early on, before you've invested weeks or months in someone who actually isn't available for the kind of connection you want. That is not rejection. It's actually clarity. And clarity, even if it stings, protects you from wasting your time and wasting your energy. I would say, though, if someone is confused, talk about it a little more. Ask how they want the date to go or what's important to them. Sometimes we don't understand new concepts immediately. It can take a little while for it to get in. And the great news is, if someone responds with relief or a visible, relaxing, a real smile or a yes to your request, you've changed the entire shape of what the next hour or so is going to be like. And in my experience, it happens far more than people expect. So that's the first move, let's call it, toward love after 40, the first shift. Besides the apps, besides the photos, it's being willing to be a little bit more real, to value your time and to value your dignity rather than waste it performing or trying to prove something about yourself. It's really simply naming the context out loud at the beginning of a date and saying, hey, let's be honest with each other instead of trying to impress each other. Let's actually see what's here instead of performing at each other and hoping that something real somehow squeaks through. That one small shift can change everything that follows and how you actually feel in the conversation. It can change how much of yourself you have access to. And it can change whether you come home knowing something real about a person or just having scratched the surface. So, this is what I want you to take away. You are not helpless in a dating experience, and you don't have to just endure whatever dynamic forms on its own and then analyze it to death after and look for why it didn't work or what went wrong. You can actually lead, not in a controlling way, in a relational way, right? You can set the tone, you can invite honesty, you can make it more likely that something real happens from those very first few minutes. It's a form of relational leadership that most people don't know they have access to. But once you start practicing it, dating becomes something that you. This is a form of relational leadership that most people don't know about. They don't know they have access to. And once you start practicing it, dating stops being something that happens to you and it starts being something you're an active participant in creating, which is so much more enjoyable. So before your next date, what I invite you to do is find your version of this sentence, right? You can use mine if it feels right, but find yours. Make sure it feels good to you. Because the version that sounds like you, that you could actually say without feeling weird, you might feel a little bit weird or a little bit awkward, but without it feeling like a script, write it down somewhere, try it once, maybe even look in the mirror. This shared context piece is the beginning of what I call a discovery-based date. And there's a whole framework underneath it. Again, there's simple shifts like that. And the framework covers everything from how to ask questions that reveal who someone really is without having to feel like an interview, to how to handle the moment when you're not sure whether what you feel is chemistry or something else, to know whether to stay and be curious or walk away. All of that is in my guide called the Honest Dating Guide. And I'll put a link in the show notes below if you want to go deeper into this and explore this more. Everything in the guide is built on the same foundation as what we talked about today. And it's so much focused on how you can stop performing or feeling like you need to prove or impress, and instead start discovering other people and stay connected to yourself and enjoy yourself while you get curious about someone else. It's a different approach to dating entirely. And the people who have tried it keep telling me the same thing. I did not know it could feel like this. I had lost hope that it can be enjoyable. I'm so grateful that I can enjoy dates again. And I feel so much more hope and promise that this could turn into a relationship, that I can find the person for me. Next time, I want to go into what happens once the shared context is set and the date is actually underway. That's where many people slip back into old patterns without even realizing it. There's a question you can start asking yourself mid-date or maybe a few times during a date that keeps you connected to yourself and keeps the discovery real. And it's, again, not a question that I find most people are asking. And when you hear it, I think you'll realize how it can keep you connected to yourself. I'm so glad you're here. I want you to have the love you want. And deciding to date differently, to stop auditioning and take the pressure off yourself and actually let something real happen matters. It's not a small thing, even though there are these simple shifts. I'm so glad you're here. I want you to have the love you want. And deciding to date differently, to stop auditioning, to take the pressure off yourself, to actually let something real happen, it's not a small thing. And what I love is giving you simple shifts that make profound differences. And the fact that you're here thinking about this, caring about this, that is the practice. That is practicing love. I'll see you in the next episode. And until then, explore this. See what it's like to create your own statement, something that feels easy and maybe not totally natural, but, right for you. What do you want to say to someone to start a date off, to relieve the pressure, to make sure that you don't have to perform, you don't have to prove, that you really get to relax and enjoy yourself? See you next time. I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Practicing Love. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and gained insight into yourself and your current and past relationships and inspiration for what's possible. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe and write a quick review to help people find us. If you'd like more support in your love life, be sure to get your free copy of my best-selling book, Honest Sex, at shanajamescoaching.com/free. That's shanajamescoaching.com/free. And we'll see you next time.